calendar thing on my calendar says order bubble tea at this time, so it arrives like right before
Wow.
7:45.
You scheduled a bubble tea.
Okay, cool. Let's get started, shall we?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 8th Friends of Figma Singapore event on content design. Before we jump into the talk, we'd like to kind of briefly introduce the team and start with the light warm-up interactive activity. So I'm Zoe, your host for the session today, and we also have Sam, Wei Sing, and Chloe and Tian with us, who will be greeting you in the chat as well as working behind the scenes. As you can see, we have two brand new and awesome members, Chloe and Sam. Chloe is taking care of our social media, job posts, as well as working on our new branding with Tian. And Sam, who has been working hard on the interactive file, and you'll hear her from her in a bit as she walks you through the file. So let's kickstart today's event with our interactive file. I think Tian has sent the link in the channel, so please jump into the file and we'll see you there. Over to you, Sam.
Hi, everyone. So if you jump into the file that we just sent in the chat, we're going to be building monsters today for our interactive activity. You'll find it in this first page, Monsters Workspace. And the theme we have is imagine that COVID is over, and as monsters, we're getting dressed to take over the world. So we'd like you to get a monster workspace, and you can claim any one of these monster workspaces by renaming it. And we encourage you to rename it with your social media handle so we can tag you later after the event. And we've created some parts for you to dress your monster, which you'll find here. Monster parts and accessories. So I can do a quick demo. They are created in components and variants. So you could copy paste any of these into your workspace. Make sure that you're in the correct component, and delete your placeholder and copy paste it inside and continue building your monster. So once you're finished dressing up, getting accessories, feel free to change them from different variants, detach them if you don't like it, Google search with transparent images in the background. And once you're finished, you'll get deployed to your next mission, and you'll enter on this launchpad here, which will take you to your next mission, where you'll have other instructions. And that's it for now. So you can go back to the monster workspace and start building your monsters.
I could see the Zoe's monster here. Hey Zoe, have you changed your monster? It looks like you want to kill everyone.
I'm just terrified all the time, so I want to describe my mood.
Yeah, what you worried about?
Right now, I'm just thinking about dinner because I just started talking about it.
Who's the random doggo?
Random doggo.
It's also me.
That cute.
I was looking for like the pushing cat, and then I found the pushing dog, and I was like, okay, let's not be biased about cats here. Let's add a dog instead.
Oh, it's so cute. So smiling.
I love that everyone's adding their own touch to the monsters. Some new GIFs as well. Sorry, PNG.
Create some monsters too.
Is that like a tongue? Like the red one. It looks like a tongue monster. The number 11.
Oh,
Number 11. It looks like
Yeah.
pizza for me.
Oh,
Do you wanna start deploying people
Oh, I
to
can
Ooh.
actually
the city? Let's take over the
I can
city.
actually
have
animate
people.
my own lady.
Oh, Tian.
oh.
Yeah. This is disco monster.
What is
Oh
going
my
on?
Oh my god, this is great. Yeah, we can start deploying some monsters. Should we open it?
Yeah, let's go, let's go, let's go.
Go into it. All right. So once you've created your monsters, your next mission is to find your monster because he or she has been lurking, waiting to be activated. And when you find your monster, you'll have to activate it by making it say something, make it pop with one of our speech bubbles, and continue to destroy Duxton with some of the superpowers that we've come up with. And feel free to create your own. You'll find them in the assets panel under superpowers. Oh no, it's slow. All right. Yeah. So let's go find our monsters. Other people in there already.
Hey, I haven't done my monster. So many choices.
You created the file. You should have a monster ready.
Oh,
Okay, let's look.
oh, this monster is really hidden. Chloe, we found you.
Really?
Okay,
Found
where's
Chloe.
mine?
Chloe, what would your monster say?
Oh, yes. Where's the eyes?
Oh no, we must have did the components. Oh,
Didn't paste it in the frame.
like
It happens.
ugly.
Yeah, it's out of the company.
Happens to the best of us. Don't worry.
Oh, wait, how do you get deployed to the mission?
Sorry.
How do you deploy to the mission?
Ah,
You can
So-
just go and find it in the page called Duxton.
yeah.
Right. Okay.
So you can go to the frame here, or you can click into Duxton really.
Okay.
Okay, for those who just joined, I dropped the link there again. Oops. Not there.
How are you guys finding your monsters so fast?
I keep forgetting what my monster looks like.
You can add a name. I think there's a name tag instance. You can add a name to yours. It helped me. Otherwise, I would not be able to find mine either.
Oh yeah, I found mine.
I see a no face.
I see a Doraemon. Someone make a Doraemon.
Why is it a giant pizza in the swimming pool?
We can start taking over the city with your superpower. Sam, maybe you can add like a pizza somewhere.
Yeah,
Just
just like
to-
pizza in
yeah.
the water.
Just to showcase folks how to take over the city with food.
Oh, Grandpa Grape. Hi, Anna.
Hi.
Hi, Anna. The question we all ask ourselves: what am I doing with my life?
Every day. Oh, your neighbor.
Oh,
Has anyone started using any of the superpowers yet?
You can resize the food to like as big as you want, as small as you want. Maybe not too small. It's really hard to find it if it's too small.
ah, finally found my monster.
All over the city.
Wow, this Doraemon. Wow, was it built from the component, the Doraemon one?
Some parts of it, yeah.
Nice.
Ooh.
Monsters peeking out from everywhere. Okay, shall we head to the next section of today's event? Hope y'all having fun in the file. Cool, thanks so much for joining us in the file and creating monsters. The file will still be there, so just feel free to create more monsters and adding more food everywhere. We want to really take over this little part of town. Let's move on to our next and main section of the event and our, of course, our wonderful talk with Laura. So a little bit of an intro about Laura and about what the talk today is going to be about. So Laura is a content designer with over 10 years of experience in designing and writing for digital services. She is currently the UX content lead at Tomorrow by UOB, where she's working on making financial products easier to understand and more fun to use. Laura loves plain language, making complicated stuff easy to understand, and truly awful puns. In her talk, she will take you through what she's learned about good content design, methods for great collaboration, and how you can truly embed content design into your workflows. So without further ado, again, over to you, Laura. So glad to have you here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Zoe. First of all, the mandatory Zoom technical check. Everyone can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Yep.
I take silence as a yes. Excellent. Next up, we'll see if you can see my screen.
Perfect.
Excellent. And you can read it. Everything's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Let me just do a little bit of a shimmy with my notes. All right, here we go. Cool. So hi, everyone. As Zoe so kindly introduced me, I'm Laura, and I'm indeed a content designer. And I've been kind of doing content design for longer than it's been called that. I think you'll often find, there's this whole conversation around, is it UX writing? Is it content design? Is it content strategy? What do we call it? But I think I'm quite adamant on content design, and I'll touch a little bit on why that is during this talk. But one of the things I really love about my job, no matter what my title is that I get to work with a lot of people, a lot of very different people. And I don't think, I don't go a day without collaborating with someone. Often it's someone quite close to my own specialty. So it might be someone who's like a UX designer, a researcher, a developer, etc. But I also, like every designer, have to work with a lot of business stakeholders. And when it comes to content, those business stakeholders tend to be perhaps more varied, or certainly kind of different than who you would encounter otherwise, maybe. So for me, that includes people like legal and compliance. I think rule number one of content is make friends with compliance. It's marketing folks. They often will have a say in kind of voice, or you'll certainly end up collaborating on things like tone of voice. For us, it's our local team. So Tomorrow is currently live in Indonesia and Thailand, excuse me. And in both of those countries, we obviously need to translate and make sure everything we're doing kind of works within that local context. And finally, for us, it's also product people. So people who are very close to the thing that we're kind of building the digital service for. And while that collaboration is often my favorite part, it can also be kind of like the hardest bit, right? Wrangling all of those different viewpoints and kind of getting it all to come together in a way that still serves the user. And over my years of doing this, I've learned a few lessons about how you can involve other people, and maybe how you shouldn't do it, and how to get them to be involved at the right time. And I have to tell you, most of these have been hard won. Most of them are lessons you learn from mistakes, like many other things. So today I'd like to take you through some of those lessons. I kind of touch on three different pieces, really. One of them is mindset. Second one is tools. This is, a Figma talk after all, so tools seems appropriate. And the third one is about kind of getting feedback, getting everyone to come together at the right time, and getting that kind of feedback at the right point in your process as well. So let's start. So I'll get started on the most nebulous kind of those three things. And mindset is, I think, also one of the hardest ones. It's certainly the one I need to kind of think about actively every single day. And this one has been kind of a mantra of sorts, a thought I keep repeating to myself often. I've stolen this from somewhere. I can't for the life of me remember where. I've had it with me for years and years. But I like to remind myself that everything I write is a first draft, every single thing. And what this really means, this kind of mantra means, is that I consciously try and approach all of these different pieces of writing as kind of open to feedback, and be okay with the fact that some things will change, lots of things will change, and that's okay. It somehow makes it easier to be kind of open to that collaboration and that feedback if you don't go into it kind of thinking that this is final and this is great and awesome. And yeah, sometimes you get feedback that is not so helpful. Sometimes it can feel downright dumb, though I try and be kinder about that to the person giving the feedback. But usually there's always a valid reason for it. And I think once you dig past the suggestion, whatever it is, and you get to the root of it, sometimes that's very helpful. And even if we decide, you know what, that's not something we're going to take on board, just acknowledging it can be valuable, even just for that relationship. The second thing I like to keep kind of close to me as I'm working is this. Writing is often a process of thinking. sometimes you start having questions and kind of really those detailed nitty-gritty things coming to you once you're working on the content itself. Does this, term really mean what I think it means? Or is this actually how it works once you start kind of putting things in order? And sometimes kind of that collaboration of asking questions and writing multiple versions, it can feel like it goes against this idea of authorship. If anyone has ever done like a writing program at university or any kind of writing program, you kind of get sucked into this idea of like the lonely artistic genius who works away in their garret studio. And that kind of, okay, that might work for, I don't know, Wordsworth, but I don't think they ever had to write human readable terms and conditions page for an app. And I think that's where you have to kind of collaborate and you have to be open to that. And speaking of human readable terms and conditions, I wanted to not just keep this kind of very high level, but show you some really practical examples. So here's an example of how a first draft evolved over the course of collaborating with various stakeholders. This is a piece of kind of terms and conditions-y text that we have to show on a loan product kind of onboarding flow. And the one at the top is what we started out with, the original first draft that I wrote. And I liked it. I thought it was pretty clear. But then we had some feedback, and product and compliance came back and said, actually, we need to add a bunch of stuff to it. So they came to us with the middle version. And it's kind of long, right? And it kind of gets things muddled up. So what did we do? I think we actually jumped on a call with the POs and the people involved in this and kind of hashed it out. And then the final one we went with is the one at the bottom. So again, removed from the first one, some of you might argue that the first one is better. Maybe it was, but there were certain kind of regulatory things we had to hit. And I had no way of knowing that when I was writing the first version. I needed the input of the other people in order to be aware of it and then come up with the final version that kind of balances between the two. We ended up adding one line, but at least, it didn't go as long as the version that came back to us. So that's really just half the truth. This is what the reality looks like. I wrote, and this is not even all of them, I think I wrote at least 20 or 30 versions of this tiny, tiny box of text. But that's what sometimes you need in order to get to the result that's actually what you want to do. And this thing goes in the other direction too. I joke that I kind of like to get in everyone's business and poke at things that aren't any of my business to begin with. But I think it's good to involve kind of other designers in the process of writing as well. Writing isn't just for people who are writers. Writing is for everyone. And this is something I did with the team on a cross-sell message where we wanted to get some kind of lots of divergence, lots of different ideas on the table quite quickly. And I think it took us all of 45 minutes. I think I had a UX researcher and 2 UX designers on Figma with me, and we were just kind of jamming out, writing some versions and coming up with options. And let me tell you, if I'd done this the lonely artistic genius way and worked on it myself, it would have taken me at least 2 days to come up with this. And I don't think I would have had half of these ideas. So it really is worth involving as many people as you can at that kind of early stage of your writing and ideating. Then you can go in and do polishing. That's fine. But I think getting the ideas out is always a good idea. Sometimes the solution to a content problem isn't words, though. And this is what I mean when I say I want to get involved in everyone's business. And I think I saw one of our old POs on the call. So hi, Roy. You'll maybe recognize this example. We had POs approach us and tell us that they had a bit of a problem with a flow that was live. And the issue was that we asked our customers to upload a proof of income. The problem was they only have to upload one, but we list all the different types they can, and it kind of feels like, oh, you have to upload all 4. So the brief they came to us with was like, can we change the heading? Can we make the words kind of communicate this thing that you only have to upload a single document? Well, we kind of looked at it and we said, oh, I don't think words are going to help you. What this needs is a hierarchy change. It needs to visually communicate the same thing that we want to communicate with words. So what we did instead, we ended up not changing the heading. we ended up instead looking at the data and realizing that most of our users were uploading a single type of document. And we made that the preferred choice and hid everything else behind a link. This means that now the visual communicates the same thing we wanted to communicate with words. You just need to upload one. So let's do a quick recap. What can you do with mindset? Number one, jot down questions as you write and ask them, bring them up. It might make you feel a little bit silly at the beginning, but sometimes I like to play the dumb questions card and just ask them. Often you'll find other people have that same question as you if you're on a call. The second one is pair write with non-writers, people who might not identify as writers. They'll have great ideas. And remember that content is about more than just the words, and you have every right to get up in other people's business if you think that makes the solution better. So next up, let's chat tools, if my slides will work. There we go. So this is a question. What tools should you use? And this is a collection of the types of tools I've used across my career. It's not the full list, but it's got most of the major categories, the highlights, if you will. And there are some in here that are better than others. I've worked in Word files, I've worked in Excel, I've done little PowerPoints with screenshots and tables of content. I've gone directly into the CMS. I've edited HTML files. I've edited JSON files directly for developers. There was a point where I used to stand behind the art director and point at their Photoshop file and ask them to change the things I wanted them to change. And then we had to have a discussion about M dashes and N dashes and, all that fun stuff. And even with sketch files, even once we did get to a point where I was working in an actual design file, you'd always have that problem of passing it back and forth and airdropping, right? And never quite knowing what was the latest version. And to me, it never kind of made sense that this content lived in kind of a file that's separate from the design. They're one and the same. You can't have the design without the content, and the content makes very little sense without the context of the file. Because if you take that content out, what are you kind of left with? And that's why I very strongly believe this. Visual design and content design should live in the same tool. We should be using the same thing, and hopefully, it should be the same file. And the Tomorrow team, we kind of migrated to Figma in late 2019, early 2020, which was kind of just in the nick of time if you think about what happened next. I can't imagine having to airdrop sketch files back and forth when we were all sat in our respective living rooms and bedrooms. And Figma has really been kind of a real game changer when it comes to delivering content, especially. I think, there's lots to say about how it works for design, but for content design, I think it's really, really empowering. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do at Tomorrow to make that happen. I'm sure there's lots of other ideas and other great ways of using it, but this is kind of what's working for us at the moment. So what we're doing is Figma is our one source of truth for delivery, both design and content. We use a localization platform where we kind of deliver our strings as keys to the developers, and we just make sure that's kind of synced up with Figma. So all of our text layers, wherever we expect to kind of developers to be going into a JSON file and finding the content, we tell them exactly what the key name is by renaming the text layer in our Figma file with the key name. That's a little bit convoluted if you're not used to kind of key management, but that essentially means that developers can go on Figma, they'll find all of the components, they'll find all of the strings, everything's ready for them, they just kind of take it and go, instead of having to search or copy paste or do any of that stuff. Tools by themselves, of course, don't kind of solve any problems, they're only half of it. You also need to make sure you're communicating. And Tian from our design system team actually came up with what we're calling screen marks. And these are kind of designed to help everyone get on the same page about where we are in terms of, let's say, our key tagging process. Which screens are ready, where are we still working, or in some cases, when we expect content to be coming from some other system. So it really becomes one centralized place for people to understand where they can get the stuff they need in order to build it. And I generally think that over-communicating is much better than under-communicating. When you're all working in the same file, same tool, it's kind of no longer up to you how you organize them, right? You have to have systems in place for that. And having those common systems and being very explicit about what they are will set you up for success in the long run. Sometimes the little things that you think don't really matter might actually matter hugely for some other type of designer. For example, for us, it's the way artboards are named. We export them out as screens for our content management platform, and suddenly how they are named really, really matters so that we can find them in the future. So a quick recap on tools. This is what we're doing. Figma is the source of truth for both design and content. It all lives in one place. Strings and localization management is done centrally in a tool, and we manage that as well. So we make sure that, you know, the people who care about the thing are the ones who touch it, if that makes sense. So we're the ones who care about exactly what the punctuation is, how it's laid out, what the words are. We're the ones looking after it. Your files are a shared space, so do keep that in mind. And tools only really work as well as your kind of agreed ways of working. So spend some time on that, and, you know, be overly chatty if need be. I find that's often helpful. All right, I'll keep going onward. The final piece, and perhaps the trickiest one I find to get right, is feedback, and specifically the gathering of it. I talked a little bit about how to kind of approach this with the mindset piece, the fact that, okay, you're going to get feedback, be prepared for it, keep an open mind. But I think you have to go beyond just handling it, right? I think in order to be a good designer of any ilk, you have to seek feedback. And what I like to do is I kind of want to get a wide group of stakeholders to collaborate on content and get them involved very, very early. That's not to say that, you know, all of us sometimes feel guilty of like wanting to squirrel your work away, not show it till the last minute and somehow feel like it's more protected that way. But it's a first draft. You want input. Keep that in mind. But then you get these guys, right? I really like maroon. I don't think my grandmother would understand this word. All real comments. That's not super helpful. So how do you avoid kind of this kind of feedback and you get the helpful stuff you actually really, really want? I've been experimenting with kind of two really like methods, or like two workshops. And they help us differentiate between what's early stage feedback and what's late stage feedback. And the difference between those is really early stage is kind of like setting you up, and the late stage is just making sure you've got all your details down. And let's start with the early stage one first. We call this content mapping, and it's a method we've kind of developed, and we ended up, it was kind of born out of necessity, to be honest. We started out using a conversation design workshop, and we very quickly last year had to figure out how to do that remotely. And out of that kind of invention came content mapping. What content mapping is really kind of a workshop to get all of your stakeholders aligned and make some early kind of big decisions about the content in your flows, in your service. What you want to kind of do is be very open-minded about who you invite. So you want to get in a broad range of people, basically anyone who you think can come in at a later stage and go, oh, I wasn't consulted. You want them to be in this workshop. This is a kind of a chance for everyone to build consensus on what's important, for everyone to also understand what content design is. It's a kind of a good chance for everyone to build empathy for the user, and, you know, do that across the business, not just within the little design team. And it's also a great place to get any kind of early requirements for things like compliance or product or servicing, things that sometimes kind of end up left till the end. And it's also a great place where you can like put a couple of things down, and then once people come back later in the process, you can go back and say, okay, this is what we actually decided. Are we still, does that still hold, or do we have to take a couple of steps back? So it just kind of helps you keep that in check. So what is content mapping, you might ask? You'll see some posted pictures. These are from the times before. Now we do this online, and I'll show you how that looks like as well. So what this is essentially a workshop. If you think about where you kind of are in your design process, you'd want to have a general idea of your customer journey map, or whatever other kind of mapping you're doing. So some idea of what this service kind of flow through the service roughly looks like. And you'll want to have an idea of who you're designing for. So some kind of persona, some data on your users, some like that. So but you don't want to have any wireframes. This is key. This is before you draw any wireframes. So how you prepare for this is have your user journey map ready. If you're short on time or you have a very, very long journey, pick the most crucial kind of content steps in the journey to map for. It is a time-consuming process. So if you've got 30 steps, you might not want to do the whole thing. Then you'll want to invite all of those stakeholders, get that wide group of people in. And usually I find an hour and a half to 2 hours. 2 hours is like max. More than that, and people get tired and hungry, and you don't want that. And if you're doing this remotely, you then prepare your board and do all of that fun stuff. How you run it is like this. We go step by step through your journey map, whatever steps you've selected for mapping. At the beginning of it, we remind everyone of kind of the persona who we're designing for, and then the journey step we're in. So, okay, we are now in the onboarding step of filling in your address details, for example. And you'd want to maybe kind of add some meat to those bones, talk about how the user's feeling, etc., etc. Then you'll start asking your participants to write down questions that they think the user will have at this stage on Post-its. What are top of mind for these users? What do they want to find out about? You let them do that quietly, and at the end of it, together you kind of come together as a group and you cluster them. You will, like every time I've run this, we find that there's some broad kind of clusters that you can start forming. Then you'll want to vote on your most important content clusters. This gives you a priority list. So at address filling stage, am I allowed to fill in an international address? Trumps, what's the postcode format, for example? And then, this is magic, you can get those stakeholders in the room to help answer those questions for you. So it becomes not only a kind of an idea of what content do we need, it also becomes a session in which you get some real answers. You find out exactly what that fee is, or how this thing works, or what that term means. And then we come to the final step, which is my favorite, jargon bust. You can get all of your stakeholders together and get them to highlight any terminology that they think is unclear to the user. So essentially, what they do is they do the hard work for you. You end up with a clear idea of, oh, this is a word I don't think our users will understand. And you'll have a list of those to go through as you start your content design. I know that's very kind of high level, but here's what that ends up looking like after you've done that for all of those steps. So you'll have a bunch of questions. This is an example from, I think, a credit card, questions around cashback, etc. And we can cluster them out, and then you'll see these votes. That's the priority list. So we decided that this was the most important thing to talk about in this particular step. And then you get some answers, and you will see these lovely question marks. That's our jargon jam. So all of our stakeholders agreed that aggregate daily balance is very hard for customers to understand. That's great. We have some consensus. Now we have kind of leeway to go and change some of that language, right? Okay, so now you've involved your stakeholders early. You can go away, you can design some stuff. You've got a rough content skeleton of what you need to address in your wireframes, in your designs. So you go away and you do that. You do your kind of stakeholder engagement, all of that stuff. There's usually a smaller kind of core group that you end up working with. But with content, you kind of need all of those other stakeholders to come back in again. And often for us, the big one's been, like I said, compliance. You want to be friends with them, but also like marketing people and your local people and anyone who's involved in the translation. You want all of those people to see the content and comment on it, especially if you're about to localize it. You want all of that feedback before it goes into translation. So for that, we do what I call a content walkthrough. And this is like a big meeting where you invite all of those people again from across the business to come in, and you take everyone through your kind of designs and your content screen by screen, and you stop. And there's a little bit of an uncomfortable silence where you go, any feedback, any comments? And then you wait. And sometimes there are, and sometimes there aren't. For any feedback that we get, we use a traffic light system. So we categorize all feedback as either being green, like, yes, we agree this is a good change, we shall do this. Amber, meaning, oh, we don't have the information we need, or there's two opposing viewpoints in the room, or we need some more kind of input from somewhere. With amber feedback, we always kind of try and action point it to someone. So someone takes that feedback and does something with it ASAP. And then there's red feedback, which is often feedback that isn't actually content feedback. It's like, I don't like maroon, or I love maroon. It's like, great, thanks for playing. We'll note that down and get back to you later. The other thing that we found really, really useful is keep really meticulous notes of what was signed off and what changes were agreed to, and make sure you share those with everyone after. Don't sit on them, just make sure that everyone's on the same page. And that kind of actually, we've seen the first time we ran one of these, I think we overran spectacularly. It was meant to be an hour, and I think we went on for at least 2. And that was just a sign that it was like a pent up need for it in the business, and they'd never had this opportunity. So everything kind of came out in this session. Now we've streamlined them quite a bit, and we can get through them in about an hour. And I personally at least find it very, very helpful. And it's also kind of lowered the amount of rework we have to do. So even if you're doing like a design walkthrough, I highly recommend you do a specific content one as well. People are looking out for different things when you do one of these. All right. At the end of one of these, you should have some very kind of good idea of what your content looks like, and you can then go away and just get it all done and dusted and live. I'd like to conclude on this one. So going back to my kind of, are you an artistic genius or not? You may be, but the content we work on is still a shared concern. There's lots and lots of kind of people who have very kind of good feedback on it and good opinions and good viewpoints that there's no way for one person to know. So it's really about how to engage those viewpoints and those people at the right point successfully, and making sure you're kind of keeping it all straight. Go into it welcoming that feedback, structuring it well, running some really cool workshops, and keeping your mind open. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It's such a great talk, and I really enjoy learning more about how content design work in your team, and especially the content mapping session where we would kind of invite people to start thinking about content together, finding consensus and working on it together. And I think writing is definitely design, I should call it content design, as we can see through the similarity in processes. Personally, I have not worked with a content designer, so this is kind of giving me a bit of FOMO, like I'm missing out on like all of this like awesome collaboration. But yeah, thank you so much. Let's jump right into the Q&A section. I think Tian has shared the link to Pigeonhole, so let me try and share my screen. Can you see my screen with all the questions? Yes, okay, cool, cool. All right, so yeah, Chloe, I think we can start highlighting, oh cool, it's a very cool transition. Also support local, use Pigeonhole. Okay, let's start with our first question. What's your designer to writer ratio and what's your workflow? Any tips for a sole writer working with multiple designers and product managers?
Oh, this is such a good question, and I feel you, whoever wrote this. So our current designer to writer ratio, I'll talk about how it is tomorrow. So we've got kind of 2 full-time writers, and I want to say 5 designers, and then design systems on top of that. We also have someone who looks after our localization for us, so like a localization manager. We're very lucky to have that ratio, to be honest. When I started, it was just me, and I think we had one more designer at that point. So it's definitely improving. But I've also been on teams where I've been the sole writer, and there's like 50 designers. So that's also very possible. I think when you're a sole writer, it's kind of, you have to read the room a little bit and figure out what works best for you. Like I said, I like to get up in everyone's business. So for me, the idea of just working on everything on a very surface level feels like I'm not sure I could do that. So I think how I'd approach a situation like that would be to try and find the most important, most impactful project where you can show the value of content design, where you can actually like make some significant changes. Focus in on that, go deep on that one, and then find ways of doing kind of self-service for other projects, or find ways of being really like lightly involved in the other projects. Maybe do some, I don't know, workshops for where designers can come in with their content and work on it themselves, or business people can come in and work on it themselves, and you're kind of providing lots of support in a single, let's say, an hour and a half session. That's maybe how I would approach that. But I know it can be difficult if you're kind of expected to be the final word on everything, and you'd still like to have like a life outside of work. But that's maybe how I'd try and approach it and see if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think related to this, I guess, I think at least in Singapore, I'm not very sure about elsewhere, but I see that there is a lot of sort of, a single content designer within a team, and there are even teams without content designer. So like, do you have any tips for, teams without content designer that want to kind of still set up that process?
Yes, absolutely. So the content mapping workshop can be run by anyone. We actually have projects where I'm not involved in that workshop, where we have like the UX designers or the UX researchers run that workshop, and they do it really well. So definitely try that one. And that will help you get kind of a content kind of skeleton together before you go into your wireframing. The other thing might be, if you're kind of writing curious, is figure out some like really helpful little tone of voice things that you can look at. There's quite a lot out there in terms of just kind of blogs and people writing about UX writing. So look at that. I think Google has some really good guidance, for example, on how they approach content design, just like some basic principles, and you can start applying those already. Just things like make sure that you're front loading your content. So meaning that the most important thing is first. You can do stuff like that really easily, even without being a UX writer.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Let's move on to the next question. What's the distinction, I guess, between UX writing and marketing writing, or are they the same team? What is it like in your team, at least, and what's your view on it?
So I don't think I've ever worked as a UX writer on a team that would also cover marketing. I think that would maybe depend a little bit on your like business setup, but in general, they are different practices. Having said that, there's a lot of like transferable skills between the two. Like writing is writing, right? And there are lots of UX writers who come with like a marketing writing background, because that's traditionally where kind of copywriting has had positions and has had people working in it. But I think the difference is really kind of UX writing is more akin to I'd say kind of UX design, I guess, in the sense that you're more concerned about things like accessibility and usability, etc., and how the thing works. Whereas marketing writing, maybe especially if you're thinking in a more traditional sense, is more about how do we make this attractive? How do we make sure that people know about us? How do we make sure that people find us and kind of get through the door? So we're kind of the next step, which is like, you're through the door, great. What happens next? There is some difference in skill set. So I'd imagine marketing, like UX writers, especially if you're working on apps, etc., you don't really have to worry about things like SEO or any of that stuff. You're more worried about, being clear in some of those accessibility standards, etc. So slightly different focus, I would say, but lots of transferable skills.
Cool, awesome. Oh, okay. This is my question. I think I'm still struggling with this. Yeah, even when it comes to kind of design. So I'm curious, like, is it the same with content design? How do you measure the impact of your work?
Yeah, I think same waters, man. I think there's similar metrics. So things like ease of use is a really good one. Looking at time on task, although that can be a little bit tricky, you have to kind of be very context aware with that one, where you're applying that. Other ones are, we kind of take a look at call center queries. So if a certain new feature would, let's say, means that we're getting lots and lots of call center queries, then it means that there might be an issue with the content, or it might be an issue in the design, but that's often a good sign. The other things we do is, when it's about process efficiency in particular, we're looking at content defects. So how many kind of defects get logged that are related to the fact that a translation was missing, or we've done something funky in the string, like we just messed up and goofed up, etc. So we do keep tabs on those numbers as well, just to kind of give some numbers to a topic that can feel very kind of wishy-washy. Yeah.
Cool, awesome. That's good to know. Yeah, I don't know, like in do you use like user index score or any of those like SUS stuff? Because I think there's like generally a category, a question that's something like is the content readable and stuff like that. Is that something that your team is using as well?
We're not using it on the live product, but when we are doing usability testing, we are testing for comprehension often. So that's one of the things we will kind of ask about.
Do you have like specific kind of tests that you run just for content, like separate from the design stuff?
Currently, we don't. I would love to. That would be really cool if we could. It's been a kind of choose your battles kind of a decision not to do that. We do sometimes, so we've done a couple of studies where we're very lucky to have a behavioral scientist at our company, where we've done some studies on specific kind of messaging and the emotional kind of responses to that messaging. But that's been with a very, so was that that was a
so I think someone just accidentally unmuted.
Sure thing. So that's something you can do as well.
Cool, awesome, cool. Let's move on to this has 10 votes. What should I do if I want to improve the content approval process, but half the stakeholders don't want to change the way they work? I feel like this is the story of everyone's lives here.
Yeah, I feel all of this pain, guys. I feel every single bit of it. This one's tricky because it kind of depends who those stakeholders are as well. My experience, my experience, to be honest, with the content walkthrough was that I walked into a bit of a vacuum where there really wasn't much of a process. So everyone's just very happy to get one. I guess the one way you could approach this is kind of just make it like an experiment, talk about it like an experiment where you're like, hey, could we maybe try this thing? And say, look, if you don't like it, we can just go back. And then if they see that it's in fact better and it works, then maybe they're more likely to go for it. But sometimes that doesn't help either. So the other option is to kind of, if it's specifically like, if it's making your life a lot harder that the approval process is kind of broken, try and find ways of explaining exactly how it's making your life harder. So what are the numbers? How is it affecting, efficiency? How is it affecting things like content delivery quality? How is it affecting all of these bits? How much rework are you having to do? And then, try and find someone influential enough to kind of champion that for you. I think that's really important as well, is finding some allies.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I learned as well, is a lot of the work that we do is just trying to get buy-in and having someone sort of, understand or at least appreciate part of the things that you're doing, and then trying and kind of use that relationship, and then also find additional allies to kind of support you, makes it really easy. But it takes a long time for that to happen. I think it takes a lot of kind of relationship building, and you also need to kind of show that you are really bringing values instead of just jumping in and like say, oh, I have this brand new kind of process and everyone should use it because it's the best, right? Sometimes
I've read about it on Twitter. We should be doing this. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Like sometimes it takes some sort of credibility that you built before you could actually push for something like that. Yeah. Oh, controversial. Words first.
Oh no.
Or design first.
Oh no, don't make me answer this. I think you have to, so I don't know how you would design without words, to be honest. Because what your design does is it imparts meaning. Does it have to be final polished copy? No, but you have to have some idea of what information, like, especially if we're talking about banking, we have to have some idea of what the information is, right? So, I'm going into a payment flow, you probably need to have an amount. That's content. You probably need to have a sender, and that's content, a recipient, that's content, etc. So I don't think anyone's ever designed without words, to be perfectly honest with you. Whether you need a UX writer to be giving you polished copy before you kind of draw any boxes, no. But I think this one, again, collaborate. So the more you can kind of involve each other in those iterations, the better.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a complete cop-out.
It's okay, we can cut this out of the recording. Just kidding. No, but I can totally relate to that. I mean, working on financial products, right? Sometimes you just have a specific flow that's already there, that you are supposed to show certain information before you can show the next information. So I think that also kind of determines how your design is laid out too. So you need to understand exactly, well, not exactly, but just in general, like what's like the content that is going to go into specific steps in the process. Right.
Yeah, I once had a really interesting conversation with someone who is designing for services that aren't necessarily kind of word-based, that are more visual, that were meant for people who have kind of limited like reading skills, for example. So they just weren't that literate, or they were working in an environment where reading was not kind of conducive. So for situations like that, I would argue you'd still probably want a content designer involved, because content designers do more than the words. It's about hierarchy, and kind of the way the thing hangs together is very much content design.
Cool, awesome. I think we have time for another question. So cool. Okay. How to overcome biases in the translation and interpretation of content when a product expands in other markets? This is very interesting about localization. I think we haven't talked about specifically localization in content writing yet, so this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, localization's really eye-opening, especially if you are localizing into a market that is not familiar to you. Like in my case, you know, it won't surprise anyone, I don't speak Thai or Bahasa, so that does come with kind of a set of things you just have to be aware of. So I think there's two sides to this, right? How do we write in a way that is easy to localize? That's number one. So avoid certain kinds of very colloquial expressions, for example. We find that that's often makes the translator's job harder than it needs to be. So try and find kind of a level which feels like it's pretty like universal, or at least near there. The second is obviously we want to be aware of any like cultural sensitivities that we might want to kind of be on the lookout for in our writing. The other side is, of course, then on the translation side. So how do we make sure that kind of the translators, because sometimes also you'll be working with localization people who aren't necessarily UX trained, and they might have some very deeply held beliefs about certain things, like, for example, banks have to sound formal. So how do you overcome that? I think that's a big question of who should be doing the localization, first of all. But I think there's things you can do to help any translator translate with success. And a big part of that is giving context. So first of all, making sure that you have kind of voice guidelines or writing guidelines that aren't just about the English, that are kind of written in a way that the local people can understand it as well, and they see how they can apply it, right? That's really important, that the guides are kind of applicable to languages other than English. What's even best is, and what we had planned before 2020 happened, is we'd actually planned to go into country and work with them, workshop on the guidelines, and come up with Thai and Bahasa versions of them. So they kind of feel ownership of them as well. The other thing is providing context. So making sure that you're not sending off some Excel file to just with no context. I think this goes without saying, but just making sure that your translators have access to like a prototype or some screens. They know exactly what the context of the screen is. We also make sure that the people who are doing the localization are in our walkthroughs. So they hear it from us as well as we're walking through it, and we're talking about exactly why we've written things in a certain way. Yeah, so I think that's kind of been key to success for us.
Yeah, I think, I mean, when it comes to localization for me, it's also not just about translation. Sometimes it's like the sound of the word, like I'm Vietnamese. So I think we came up with like a new product name, and then in Vietnamese, I didn't really think about it because I speak English when I'm like working, right? And even though I can speak Vietnamese, I'd never think of how the name would sound in Vietnamese until like we show it to like a bunch of users, and they were like, oh, this sounds kind of offensive, and it sounds like this particular word in Vietnamese. And we had to like totally rebrand and change the name of the product. So yeah, I think it's important to, you know, just have someone who speak the language and also understand the culture there with you during this process as well.
Yeah, I've got a fantastic example of that as well. Is you have to be aware that other languages work differently from English. Not all languages are Germanic, and I think Singaporeans are like very well placed to understand this. But when Facebook launched, I don't know if you guys remember, but your status used to not be like a status, but it used to begin with your name, and it used to be like Laura is doing something. It would all be in present tense. The problem with that is when you localize that into languages where you kind of have to change verb tenses, for example, depending on who's speaking, and when there's like cases, like in lots of Scandinavian languages, it gets very, very messy, and you just end up with like complete nonsense. So I like to think that's one of the reasons Facebook ended up changing it, was because there was a whole kind of host of languages where that made zero sense.
Yeah, content dictates how the design looks eventually. Cool, awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I think we're running out of time, so we'll just wrap up our session here. Thanks so much for your talk as well as for the Q&A. I think we've learned a lot, and now I need to look for a content design partner, basically.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I hope you guys found that helpful.
Awesome. Cool. So before we go, we do have a couple of things to share with everyone. Can you see the Figma screen? Yes. Yeah. Okay, cool. So in the interactive file that we sent out, as per tradition, Chloe has collected a few job posts, and I see that y'all also added a few ones. So do check them out and reach out to folks if you're looking. So thanks, Chloe, for collating, and thank you so much, everyone, for adding your job posts in there. We also have a feedback form. Please let us know about your experience and feedback so that we can make this event better for everyone. And lastly, we do have a Discord channel that we just set up where everyone can hang out and support each other. We host weekly documentary and movie nights on Wednesday. Not this week because we are having this event today, but we'll get back to it next week. A monthly-ish casual and cozy hangout where we just jump on the voice chat channel on Discord to, I can see that Ken is screaming, join our Discord and chat. Monthly casual hangout where we just jump into a voice chat channel and discuss stuff that we care about. I think we did one on design ethics, and last week we did one on UX Team of One, and upcoming we will be joined by Kiet and Melody from the community who will be demo a whiteboarding interview. We also hosted a game night, which we want to do again. It was really fun, but it's a lot of work, so I'm a bit lazy to do it now, but we will do it at some point. And with that, we've come to the end of our event, and thanks, Laura, again, for being such a great speaker and sharing your learnings. Thanks, Sam and Chloe and Tian for setting up the interactive file, as well as for managing the chat and setting up this event. Shen, our OG FOFSG member, who gave us access to a pro Zoom account because I am jobless and not in access of any pro Zoom account to host this event. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us, and we will see you soon or in 3 months. We'll see. We'll see you next quarter. All right, bye. Have a good night.